Hey, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. I'm seeing as usual that we have a plethora of viewers that outnumber the people who look like they're actually on the call. But could we just go around and say who's here so far so that those we know who's here and where they are?
It's Cozens in Indianapolis.
Isaac here
Kawhi,
from, uh,
go ahead,
sorry,
please.
calling in from Seattle. I'm with MedicMobile. Thanks.
Kawesi Joseph Kampala Jembi.
Hey, Joseph.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Patrick from Atlanta.
Hi, I'm Elijah from Nairobi.
I think we can wait maybe just a few more minutes. Jonathan was going to. Here he is. Hey, Jonathan.
And here he is. Hey there.
Great timing.
Yeah. And I think JJ, are you here on the line?
Yep, I'm here. Hello.
Hi. And I think Mike Seaton and I think Dave, are you on the line? I think both of them were going to join. They may be stuck in viewing land. I know that we don't necessarily have a lot of time when we consider our topic. So maybe we can go ahead and get started. Just to put a little bit of this into context, this is following off of Burke's conversation around an amazing future for OpenMRS. And what we really want to do at this point is start honing in on potential solutions to the problem that many implementers, many implementations are um, facing right now, and really determining what could an application framework solve. What are the critical pain points that people are experiencing now? What could that solve? And so, Greg, you've offered to open this discussion or to use some designs that you've put together kind of as a straw man to help us delve into this topic and have this discussion around what would solve key pain points for multiple implementations. So I want to say thank you for making that offer. And then just check in with everybody else and see, are there questions or comments at this point in time about the purpose of this call and where we're going, or does that sound like a solid plan for the next hour?
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. We wanted to talk about the architecture issues and what we're trying to do. And, I would like to see us start moving towards having an action team. We've talked about that before, but it may be one of those things which the only way to do it is to do it.
I think we will have to have an action team put together. I think it's important to get a good grip on what we're actually trying to accomplish and who has a vested
Absolutely.
interest. So
Great. All right, that sounds great. Thank you very much, Jennifer, for corralling all of us into the same room at the same time. It's no easy feat. As Jennifer mentioned, I think the goal for today's conversation will be to present an idea of one way which we could collaborate, and then find out if it even answers people's pain points and if it's the right place. And so some of the slides we're going to look at today is very much a collection of work from speaking with different implementers, the pain points that they've had, and trying to find a common area to go forward. It's, of course, been influenced a lot of the work that Tobin and Jonathan has been working on as well. And let me just see if we can screen share here without breaking too many things. If you want a copy of this original document, the link to the Google file is in that talk post, An Amazing Future for OpenMRS. And I'll just broadcast concurrently for anyone who's unable to pull it up. I'll just take maybe 8 minutes to go through this document, and then why don't we open up the rest of the 45 minutes for discussion after there. Let's see, can we switch? Here we are. So are people seeing a document on the Google Docs here?
Yep.
All right, sounds good. So it's been poorly named OpenMRS Flow because there's not a better name solicited yet. So the idea was that the common pain points that people have are that most implementations spend a lot of time building new forms, programs, and workflows as they move into new disease verticals. There's also issues that the current OpenMRS system doesn't work offline, that it's not responsive across mobile and tablet, and then there's, of course, difficulties with the work to collect reports. For today, let's leave reports entirely out of the discussion and focus more on the first issue of trying to create a tool which would make it easy to build and deploy new clinical programs, that you could build workflows and forms which were agnostic to the specific disease vertical. So this tool could be used for maternal child health or for communicable disease or for HIV, that you could use it either A, as a standalone application. And so this example here, this first slide we're looking at, shows that you can run, for instance, your existing system, whether you're using OpenMRS Ref App version 1.3 or version 2.6 or Ampath's version or Bomni spelled incorrectly. You could run that as you currently continue to run that system. But in theory, you could run as a standalone application this new OpenMRS Flow application, either on a mobile, a tablet, or a desktop. And in theory, it would add new functionality to your system that you didn't have before. It could work offline, it would be responsive, and in theory, it would be a lot easier to spin up new workflows, forms, and programs using this new tool. Now, in the back end, both tools, your old version, as well as this new OpenMRS Flow, would still share the same OpenMRS core database at the deepest level, meaning that if you did enter information into the new application, that you would be able to, in theory, retrieve it in the existing app front-end system that you were using. The alternative option would be that you actually integrate OpenMRS Flow into your existing legacy front-end. And so in this case, you might start, for instance, in the OpenMRS Ref app, and that might be where you're doing all of your appointment scheduling to date. But when you open a chart and when you open to start, for instance, an HIV visit, instead of starting that visit in the existing legacy front end, the application switches to running OpenMRS Flow in your desktop. You use the new functionality built into the workflows which you've ported over to OpenMRS Flow. And then when you exit that workflow, you return back to your existing legacy system. The thought being with both option 1 and option 2 is that the initial functionality of OpenMRS Flow would be very limited. This proposal with this concept paper is suggesting it would really focus on workflows, which is an elaborate form of form builders. And then over time, additional functionality could be built into OpenMRS Flow, which would expand its use case as we sort of decrease the use case of the existing multiple different front ends being used. And so this, I think, provides a migration pathway. Now, of course, the question is, why start here? Well, one, I think that this is a key pain point, but of course, this is something we have to discuss. Second, I think it introduces new critical functionality around offline as well as responsive design, which is currently not found in OpenMRS. Wide adoption is possible because of the two different ways you can integrate it with your existing system, as I've shown. It starts the migration pathway in an area which I think is important, which is the area of moving workflows over into the new system, which I think is a high-value first step. And this would just be the first of many steps. Maybe after workflows, we would add in perhaps scheduling or reporting or other functionality. There's three main components in my mind when I'm speaking about this, quote, OpenMRS Flow application. There's a patient list component, there's a workflow engine, and there's a patient chart. And in theory, an organization could choose to use all three components, or they could use just one of the components with their existing legacy system. Obviously, if in your legacy system you already had patient search and patient lists and patient to-do lists, you could keep that functionality in your old system. But then when you open a patient in your old patient list, perhaps it starts directly in the workflow engine. Now, to clarify what I mean by workflow engine, there's two components. There's the workflow render engine, and so this would be the thing that sits on the OpenMRS front-end client, and ideally it would require no customization code, and what its purpose is to ingest workflow schemas, render them on screen, and then capture information. And then paired with that is a schema document, which perhaps is written in JSON or in XForms, whatever the technology team suggests is best. But the purpose of the schema is to be able to call in standard components, which are part of a component library that you could use in your workflow. And then you could adjust the components, the properties of those components. And so, for instance, there might be within this component library information display components, such as a medication list or a lab graph or an immunization status summary. You might also have components to be able to collect data, such as radial buttons or drop-downs or free text, and those obviously need to be linked to concepts. And then you could have components which are actually actions, such as placing orders, booking appointments, and creating new patients. And then in the future, in theory, we could add more complicated things, such as triggers, such as sending text messages or more advanced clinical support. And then paired with this, we have a patient chart. And the patient chart is very similar to what I had proposed back in October. It's a standardized patient chart. You can format it and sort it based on the disease vertical you're in. But the general theme would be that you'd probably want to use this across all of your programs, and perhaps we could share this across whoever's using OpenMRS Flow. But the general customized part is the way that people customize the schema sequence that they write for their workflows. I'll skip the design principles. It summarizes what we've spoken of before, where we want parts which you can move about and that are simple to use. And I'll just jump down to a few wireframe examples. So this example here has been built in mind for a community outreach worker in an HIV clinic. And they're following up on patients who have missed appointments. They would log into the app, and of course the app would be skinnable based on your organization as branding. And then you would have a home screen. And this home screen could be customized based on who the user is and the clinic they're working in. In this case, for instance, the user is an outreach worker, and so they have several lists of patients that they follow up with. They also can see the most recent charts that they had just opened. If they click the missed appointment list, it takes them to a list where it shows patient cards who have missed their appointments. You could select a patient card, and then it takes you to start the workflow. In this case, it thinks that the workflow this person wants is the missed appointment follow-up workflow. So it's only one option. But if, for instance, you got to this page by selecting HIV clinic, there might be several different workflows to choose from. And so whoever is initiating this workflow might want to check multiple workflows at once. When starting the workflow, you would go through a series of different panels. And so in this workflow, there's 3 tabs at the top, and then each tab has several panels inside of it. This would be, for instance, a patient demographics panel, an HIV summary card, and an encounter history panel. These would be off-the-shelf components that you could just call in your schema for this workflow. And the actual details on how these components are built from a user interface perspective and from a data acquisition perspective would be handled elsewhere. You would then perhaps have in addition to displaying information such as the patient's contact number, you'd have the ability to collect information such as some questions about if they were able to contact the patient. And then at the end, you might have some actions such as booking a follow-up or placing a referral. And then you could submit that. If you wanted, you could summarize that entire workflow to the bottom of the user interface. And so as you can see, it's recessed down here. And then that would reveal on the rest of the application the generic patient chart. And this is gone into in more detail back in the October presentation. But that's kind of the summary for now. If you want to load that document, you can look through some other screenshot examples with slightly more complex workflows. This is an example on how you could have, for instance, different off-the-shelf library components to view an immunization summary. Perhaps the workflow only requires a very simple component that shows if it's up to date or not. Or perhaps the workflow requires more of a summary component such as this. These could be pre-built, shareable, and you could call them in your schema based on what's required. And I think I'll leave it there. As far as some next steps, one thing which I would propose would be interesting to discuss today is, first, if such a proposal for this sort of super-duper workflow engine is something which fills a gap, and who would be interested in working on it. Second, I don't know if people had a chance to look at Isaac's link that he had posted in the talk thread last week on the Community Health Toolkit. I think this is something we should seriously consider. It provides very much the same mission that we have to create composable, shareable components which can be assembled in different ways. And they've already built a lot of that underlying framework and infrastructure to work in an offline manner. And I think there could be an amazing synergy between MedicMobile, who's stewarding the Community Health Toolkit, and OpenMRS to work in this Community Health Toolkit as a common workplace to not only build out new technologies, but to develop best practices for user interfaces. And then there's also the third thing regarding a partnership perhaps with Clem McDonald and his team at NIH. He's been working on something called LHC Forms, which is essentially a way to take FHIR link code schemas and generate user interfaces off of them. And so that ties very closely into this work. So maybe I'll leave it there.
Should we start?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is Mark. With Dave and Mike in Boston. It looks like Cozens on the phone too from PIH.
Hey guys.
I want to say, I mean, a lot of what you're saying here really resonates with me, and I think with us in general. So we're definitely interested. We actually started over the summer building out a new kind of React-based library called React Components, and then a project within that to kind of do exactly what you were saying. Roll out a workflow-based flow on a tablet in Malawi that we could use and use it in conjunction with our existing system without having to replace the existing system. So the one main thing we didn't focus on there that seems to be a big need is offline stuff. So and as we did that, I think we definitely found out, wow, like this is harder than we thought, and getting the UI right is difficult. We're not great UI designers, so the more we could collaborate, the better. But we were basically, I mean, a lot of it was we wanted to have pick lists for searches and then run different workflows based on that. So a lot of it resonates exactly with what we were saying. So we're definitely interested. Let the other guys weigh in if they want. And also, I would recommend. I haven't looked at the community toolkit at all, but if there's good things out there we can leverage, we definitely should consider doing that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And this is just No, I think that's good. And this is Jonathan. And So I think this is a great start of stuff and a great progress. And the one thing that I want to add on to this is that I think that this whole idea of being able to establish more or less a fundamental website flow, a fundamental thing which says, okay, whatever functions you want can be brought into the workflow in this particular way. We can design those. Those can be something which can be configurable. I think that's going to make it a lot faster to get a lot of these things put together. And the one thing that I want to sort of add on top of that is that I've been talking a lot about the various functional modules and what those blocks actually are. So In Greg's last slide, he talked about what a patient selector might look like or what a checkbox mode look like. We've been able to identify about 10 or 15 kind of generic functional blocks, everything from a patient search to a panel review to a flow sheet to an order to a documentation form. And one of the things that I would suggest along with this is that we would look at a couple of those and try and say, what is the catalog of those functions that go in? How do they line up with the kinds of UI interfaces we want to do? And which of those we'd want to do first? The Community Health Toolkit, which is basically a way of doing care coordination, has a couple of those that are already laid out. And there's a few more that we'd want to do based on some of the discussions we've had in the past. So sort of combining that set of functionality and saying, okay, how does that map up to these workflows allows us to do Greg's workflow thing and have some test projects that would let us get started on it.
Cool. Thanks a lot, guys. Well, about the flow, I'm kind of thinking you probably, and thank you a lot, you probably chose mobile to just illustrate how far we can go with these shareable kind of components. However, are we kind of thinking of building these in a kind of cross-platform independent manner, or we want to track down a set of flows for one platform, let's say mobile, maybe Android or iOS, and then another set for the web?
100% cross-platform. It could work on desktop, tablet, or mobile. I just started with mobile because the screen size is the smallest. I find it's usually the most difficult to draw mock-ups that look good on mobile. But the next set of mock-ups could easily be for a tablet or desktop using the same design principles. And that's the way that the Community Health Kit has been built as well.
Cool. Thanks a lot. You mentioned that for option 2, which is the OpenMRS Flow, you would have kind of, you would kind of have different instances, if I got that right, maybe running on mobile, and then the other one could be a legacy kind of instance, maybe BAMNI or OpenMRS reference application, and then you said those could probably share a database, right?
Exactly. I think the option 2 was the one, for instance, where you work within the ref app, and then the ref app switches to OpenMRS Flow, and then you go back to the ref app to continue the workflow. Perhaps JJ or Michael or Mark might be able to comment a little bit more on that. We're having some discussions earlier in the week.
At least in our use case, we build a progressive web app in React that interacts with OpenMRS via the web services module, so via web services. So you have the old legacy UI that they're using that interacts the way the old legacy UI does, and then we have this new thing that stands separately but interacts with OpenMRS via the REST service API. So it's more than just sharing the same database. It connects to the same backend OpenMRS instance.
Okay, so in other words,
and obviously that's what we did. But that's what I would think we do something similar here. I'm not saying that's exactly what we do with this project.
And it seems that that's important if we're going to have continuity, right? I mean, rather than saying, okay, everybody drop what you're doing and flip over to this model, the idea that you could actually kind of flip in and out allows people to keep their operations going and make this be more of a radical but gradual introduction.
I mean, this is Mike. I'm not actually quite sure what another model would look like. I mean, the OpenMRS running, exposing web services as FHIR or REST endpoints, that allows many different applications to connect, as they need to and do different purposes. I'm not sure what other approach there would actually be, to be honest with you.
I don't think we want to get into the discussion of how it would work here, but I guess I was thinking if there needed to be some other kind of middleware to handle this offline first approach. Maybe not. Maybe the rest, it's the same REST endpoint. I don't think we really need to get into the details of that. But yeah, it would be there would be an API running on an OpenMRS API to be interacting with that the different UIs can interact with.
I wanted to chime in on the offline first part. So part of the reason which I find the Community Health Toolkit particularly exciting is because MedicMobile has already spent a lot of time working on developing offline first systems. And so being able to leverage the framework that they've built, I think, will get us quite far ahead. There's obviously challenges that they're running into, just as we're running into here at Ampath as we're trying to build these systems. And perhaps if multiple groups, such as us, MedicMobile, we're all collaborating around this Community Health Toolkit, we might have the funding to perhaps bring other people in, such as the BITS Co-op, which was the peer-to-peer mesh network experts out in Hawaii we had previously spoken with, who might be able to go in and build even more powerful offline capabilities. It's something that I think no single implementation would have the funding or resources to support, but if so many of us were coming together with the exact same offline sync problems, perhaps we might be able to get that co-op involved in helping us. I think Isaac was coming on next year. Sorry, Isaac.
Not at all. Thanks. This is really interesting to just listen into, and I'd be so stoked if the Community Health Toolkit ends up being useful to this larger community. We started at the hackathon at the last OpenMRS meetup. We were kind of prototyping on what CHT OpenMRS interoperability could look like, and in our typical implementation, so we're using CouchDB on the server and PouchDB on the mobile device, whether that's the client, whether that's a smartphone or a tablet or a computer browser, and that they share the same replication protocol, and so getting replication for free is really helpful, and that supports offline first in a big way. And then the way we set up the prototype at the OpenMRS hackathon was with using NiFi to send data to and from the OpenMRS REST API. And so one of the questions for me is, like, in an ideal scenario, is it going forward with the REST API? Should we be focusing more on the Fire API? You know, does that need to be built out? Is that something that could be contributed to? And you know, there are also potentially other ways to architect this as well. If not everybody feels the need for offline first, that having that database could, in theory, become optional. Whether or not we use NiFi or exactly how we use NiFi, in my view, could be optional. But the approach that Greg was describing definitely resonates with kind of how we were thinking about it, and I'd be really stoked to see the team at MedicMobile contribute to that.
And Isaac, now that we have you on the phone, maybe if you wanted to comment a bit more. I don't think many of us are familiar with MedicMobile, the Community Health Toolkit, or perhaps why there might be a really sweet synergy between our two organizations working on this common set of both technical and design tools.
Oh, sure. Thank you. MedicMobile is a nonprofit organization. We employ now about 100 engineers, designers, implementers, researchers. Our biggest office is in Nairobi with about 40 people there. And we have a smaller presence in Kathmandu, Kampala, Dakar, San Francisco, and Seattle. I'm based here in Seattle. And we've been working in digital health with a focus in hard-to-reach communities for about a decade now. Our first projects were in messaging for care coordination with community health workers. And we've kind of expanded what we do a little bit every year, with generally keeping that focus on community health and primary health systems. Our initial plan way back in the day was to use OpenMRS as the primary tool. And once upon a time, built a messaging module for OpenMRS. That was really cool. And ended up deciding that for the specific kind of use case we were focusing on, that using Couch and Pouch to support offline first would be really necessary for us. And it was always kind of my hope that we'd find a way to reconnect with the OpenMRS community at some point. We always knew that what we were building, we didn't want to repeat all the things the OpenMRS community was doing more around hospital-based care and facility-based care. And so now I feel like it's a really good time for us to, there's like enough maturity in what we've been doing, and it sounds like there might be an interest or a need within the OpenMRS community to start working together a little bit more. All of our work is 100% open source, and the Community Health Toolkit is a public good. And so, if it can be useful to people, that's really great. And even if it's just at the layer of sharing some of our design team's time and what we've been working on. We have 14 people on our design team, and that's been a real focus for MedicMobile. And so I'd be really stoked to see kind of some coherent design patterns across the Community Health Toolkit and the OpenMRS community. That'd be great. And if there's an opportunity for a deeper technical collaboration, that'd be even cooler. And I think there's a lot of mission alignment. So I'm mostly just here to listen right now and figure out what everyone else here needs. We do have existing collaborations with some of your organizations, Partners in Health in particular. But so I'm just open to learn what we might be able to do.
Can I piggyback on the offline first? We've been doing some work. I had been working on the hospital run, which is an offline first EMR for a while, and they have looked at a lot of the issues around, roles and permissions, and a lot of different. How do you synchronize offline first? So if there is some interest in maybe doing a separate community group to come together to define, what is the best way to do offline first, what things do we need to think about, and how do we handle these, these sorts of situations. I'd be interested to see if we can put a group together that's interested in talking about that specifically.
Hey, it's cool to have hospital run.
To participate. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh,
I also agree. It's cool to have hospital run here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on the call here. You guys are using a lot of really cool technologies on your system, doing quite a lot of innovative work, really a model for offline first medical record systems here in developing countries.
Yeah, we didn't. I mean, I'm not. We've been having some changeover on maintainers, and so I kind of came in for a little bit and did some contributions to it. And then my biggest focus is I just don't think there's many patients actually in the field using it. So then I kind of the last few months have been kind of coming to look more at OpenMRS and saying maybe that's where the focus should be. So that's where the patients are. So we'll see. I'm not a diehard, not a huge fan of Amber. So it's yep.
Right, and I would also say, keeping the functional hat on, that what I'm impressed by the MedicMobile stuff is how you've really addressed several key elements of what you need, particularly in the community. And I'd say in terms of our main blocks, you've got forms nailed down very nicely in ways that we could potentially build on or utilize. You've got communications started. So I think that there's a couple of significant building blocks that are started here. And it'd be very interesting to kind of see what you've done technologically in terms of making these fit in seamlessly into a general workflow. Add those to some of the things we've been talking about in terms of orders and flow sheets and so on. I think we have some great stuff. So I applaud that way that you've done these things for genuine applications and sequences of application modules.
Thank you. I'd also be really interested to see that list of the 15 or so other kind of components that are needed. There's some we can do search within the Community Health Toolkit, but we don't have a good solution for patient lists other than within search. And so that's like, we've been asked for that. That's something we've wanted to build. It I think isn't as urgent of a priority for the community health worker who, has 100 households and kind of knows them all as it probably is for a facility-based clinician. But I'd be really interested to see like more of that kind of functionality become available.
Yeah, certainly. We can share that as we go along. But patient search and patient lists are certainly two of the key elements. And some of these exist in various OpenMRS flavors or Bomni flavors or both. So a lot of this will be taking examples of these and putting them together and seeing what the best features are that we put into a final module.
Can I chime in on a slightly different direction? I want to make sure that at least my understanding of what a workflow is consistent with everybody else on this call, because I'm a little worried that it's not. This is JJ from AMPATH. On the surface, it can look like a workflow is just some sort of linear pathway or perhaps branching pathway of different components that a user might want to see in a particular order. But the way that for us is we've been thinking about it, I think more is a set of logic that enables transitions from one place to another. And to be more concrete about it, we haven't gotten all that complex, but when we were first introducing kind of this concept of workflow for our HIV care program, we looked into OpenMRS to see what was available. And it seemed like the data model for programs was probably the most appropriate place. And so we tried to make that work for us and had to end up adding extra features and, in fact, tables that exist outside of OpenMRS to support what we wanted it to do. And essentially, the way that we use workflows is that we define a program that's for something like standard HIV care. And for us, a program is then associated with a set of visit types, and then each visit type is associated with a set of forms. And when a patient first comes in, they're enrolled into a particular program, so say standard HIV care. And then when you try to go to start a visit for the patient, basically there's queries that run to figure out, is this the first time that the patient's ever been in the system? If it is, then it shows an initial encounter, an initial visit type. If they've been there before, then it will show a return. When you click on the return visit type, then it will look to see how old you are, and then show only visit types. Show only forms that are specific for your appropriate age group, so that you don't see a pediatric form if you're for an adult patient. And we've really hacked this together in a way that's pretty unsatisfying at this point. So I'm not suggesting this as the model per se, but I think what is important for us to understand is how do you represent the flow? And I want to just emphasize how important it is that there needs to be some sort of logical representation of how you go from one place to the other. And I guess moving back to maybe what Mark said earlier, just, of course, others should jump in if you have experience as well. But when you guys were working on this, were you thinking about it along these terms, or was it more just you see this component, this component, this component with no sort of logic that would separate things?
JJ, this is Mark. Are you talking about in terms of what we did for the React component stuff I was talking about?
Yeah.
Or is that he?
That's right. Yeah.
Not really, but we have those exact same, we do that same kind of stuff. It wasn't what we were handling in this. I think a lot of it gets into the details of I don't think there's maybe a conceptual difference in what a workflow is. There's just lots of different things it could have to do and prioritizing what they are. I mean, I just think like what you're saying doesn't sound like, oh, that's completely different than what I thought. It's just kind of another add-on. And it just kind of stresses that figuring out exactly how we want this workbench to do might take some work, but doesn't feel like a big conceptual shift.
Yeah,
I mean, I think as I hear it, JJ, I think you're talking about something that's a little bit more algorithmic, almost like what you'd be doing in a care pathway. Because I've been struggling with this a little bit also, but just to put a foot in the sand that people can then kick away, I think that what I've been hearing about workflow from Greg and others is really more like a flow through the site, a flow through the day. So interfaces of a bunch of functional modules that might all be appropriate for a given website. So if you look at MedicMobile, they have a maternity module which has in it an assessment and a communication and one or two other forms, and you can sort of access those in different ways. I think what it sounds like you're talking about, JJ, is similar, but has a little bit more logic, so that if I've already done this, then I do that, and if I'm at this stage, I would do this. So I see yours as a little bit more like a pathway, like we've been doing for MDRTB a little bit, or NTB, or some of those things. I think they're similar to each other, although I think one may be an easier step on the way to the other.
Thanks, actually, JJ, for bringing this up. On my list, I had configurable workflows likewise. Well, it's tricky, I would say. We've had requirements in the past where it seemed like the client never really wanted the HIV workflow that we're providing in the OpenMRS legacy, for example. And we really wanted to support what they wanted, but that we just wouldn't do it all. So, I mean, tying, we could probably choose to work with the best UX designers around the implementing partners, and figure out what are those common workflows around, and then we can support them if they're, for example, 5 for a program like HIV, or maybe if it's NCDs, we support those, and then we move forward. The other option would be, which is the hardest, I tried to see if anyone has ever thought about it. I didn't really catch it. It could be you just make it that complex that someone can define their own workflow. I mean, and I'm also going to you. Workflow to me is that path, right? I'm in the system. After I search for a patient, this is what I see, and from what I see, I can do this and this. That kind of path, that to me is the workflow. And you want to make it generic, otherwise our toolkit may not be usable in all the places, in all the countries, and in all implementations, if you tie it to one kind of workflow.
I can maybe jump in because I'm probably partly responsible for all this confusion. So I think it would be accurate to say that a lot of the mock-ups which we saw today, where you have, for instance, a form that has 3 pages that you've pulled different components for both data capture and data viewing in, is really a form with a form builder, right? And I think the reason I didn't call it a form builder was because everyone would say, well, we already have a form builder, we don't need a new one. And so I think one section of this thing we're building is just a better form builder, something which you can both collect data, but also have this whole new library of components which you can use to view data, such as lab lists or med lists. But then, as you mentioned, JJ, wrapping around this, you do actually need to put that form into more of a workflow structure with logic, with actions, which directs what forms should be visible. And so I think this is sort of a both and, where we need to sort of create a new shared form builder and then wrap that whole process around, as Jonathan mentioned, more of a workflow builder to move between forms and environments and clinical experiences.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think if you used NCD as an example, because I know a lot of people in the group want to look at NCD flow sheets for this. So if I'm taking care of a patient with diabetes, then I initially have to do initial assessments, and then I may want to make sure that there's a eye workflow and a kidney workflow and a medication workflow, and that those are all kind of tasks and sequences that have to happen. And if you sort of think of all this kind of a grand flow chart that involves different encounters or whatever else, then I think that's a large workflow. But then, to Greg's point, at each of those days, when I'm seeing the patient for, I don't know, for A1C measurement or seeing that patient for medication management, I have workflows which involve doing my assessment, looking at recent results, and maybe prescribing something. And I think that's the smaller version of the workflow. So I think one fits into the other.
This is really, really interesting to hear you all thinking along these lines. And there's some things that we're working on that I think we've struggled to document in the right way and describe more publicly so others could use. But I wonder if I could give you an example of the way we're thinking about workflow within the community health toolkit. So for example, say a community health worker gets called on the phone or somebody comes in person and says, hey, my child is sick, would you come back to my house? So she goes to the house, and when she gets there, she'll look up the patient's name, either scrolling through the list or in search. And it's organized within household. And when she's in that household, she can click on the action button, and she'll see relevant forms, like just the forms that are relevant to that household. So for example, if there's no one on HIV treatment in that household, you wouldn't see a ongoing check-in for persons with HIV form, but you would see any screening forms that are available for all households, and you'd see the child health assessment form. So she can start going through that form, and that form is built like it's specified in X forms. And it can have skip logic and stuff. You can also do what we're calling care in context. So, for example, towards the end of that form, if it's known in the health record that there are two other siblings in that household, we can add a question into that workflow to say, do you want to do a child health assessment with the other children too, if that's something that we want to prompt. And then say, for example, one of the kids was treated for malaria. It's uncomplicated fever. She gives malaria drugs, and part of the protocol is she's supposed to come back in 48 hours. So the software can automatically generate a task, and that'll go into the health worker's task list. And so then in 2 days, when she's looking at her task list, she'll see the task there. She goes back to the household, and from there, she can just click on that task, and it'll automatically take her into the form to do that, the follow-up, which has contextual information in it. So it has, based on the treatment that was done 2 days before, you selected that right form. So there are these kind of discrete components.
Isaac, I'm curious, so we're doing a similar thing, but our use case is that we have many users that may be touching the patient's record at the same time. Have you guys been thinking primarily as a one user accesses the record at one time, or can, say the next day another healthcare worker happens to see that patient and does the task at that point in time? Is there a way that those different users know about each other, or not really?
Totally. That's exactly what the being able to sync well is important for, and resolve conflicts appropriately. The projects that we're doing in Kenya and in Mali right now around closed loop care, specifically around having facility-based users and community-based users using the system. And I don't know that the way we're currently supporting this for a primary care level is exactly the way it would need to work for a larger health center or hospital setting. But it is this is something we're trying to learn. That's something we're wanting to support.
Cool. Thank you. We only have 8 minutes left till the top of the hour, and wondering what the next steps should be. Kind of the way that I'm thinking, there's probably maybe two buckets. There's technical next steps, which might involve some people who would be interested in working with perhaps Burke to look more into the community health toolkit to understand if it, from a technical perspective, might be the type of framework we're looking for. And so perhaps if people were interested in that, that would be one avenue. And then the second would be perhaps next week to have a follow-up design call where we could have a short list, let's say, of the high-value components which we would want to build if we were thinking about starting off with creating a better form builder. And perhaps if people were interested in either submitting workflows that they had or submitting forms that they think would have different types of components, we could form another group around that, perhaps through just an email list. Any thoughts?
I think there might be, those are great next steps. I think there might be overlap between those two groups. I don't know how much. I'm wondering.
Well, I think there's a couple things. There's base technology, and sort of where that goes. There is what I call sort of the functional next steps, which is what kind of modules, as we talked earlier, what kind of modules comprise this whole puzzle, and which ones we would do, and then how to map those into some of these different kinds of forms and displays and so on. So I'm not sure if the form builder is in one side or the other, but certainly there is something about base technology. There's something about user interface components, and there's something about kind of what the set of functional blocks is. On top of all that, and Jen, I see you've been writing this in the comments, as has Mark and me, that we should figure out how we keep communicating.
Exactly.
And get an active group doing this. I had proposed, since I see that the Monday design calls are still on the calendars, but probably more often than not, as far as I can tell, are left empty, that potentially this could be a regular thing that takes place during those meetings. So that's just one proposal where we could get together, where one or both work groups can start to talk, and where if we need to, we can split things up. But at least this gives us a regular place you're going to put on your calendar to start moving forward on this.
And just a note, the Monday call time works for a number of people. It works for as many people as Tuesday mornings don't work for. So we kind of have a trade-off. I know, for instance, that Burke can make the Monday times. He can't make the Tuesday times. So my preference would be to make sure that we have conversations that he needs to weigh in on the Mondays, and reserve the Tuesday times for other conversations, maybe to talk through resources, how we're setting ourselves up, how we're organizing ourselves. That's one way of doing it, but I'd love to hear other ideas as well.
Is it possible to figure out who can make, if there's a time that works for a large majority? I don't know if that's possible or not. Probably unlikely, but because you sound like you're proposing having two different meetings on a weekly basis, Jen.
It may not be on a weekly basis. We may have to figure out how often a Tuesday call. Maybe on Tuesdays we're addressing certain issues at a little less frequent than once per week.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to jump off in 1 minute. It seems like we should. To me, at least in the beginning, Burke has to be on these calls. So I would say we need to do these on Monday, and then we can figure out how to do it after that. That's just my opinion. There is something that's kind of nagging for me, which is like, I'm curious what PIH thinks and what Gemby thinks, but we're going to depend on us and a little bit of other groups to be supporting the dev and PM time for this. And there's a big issue hovering over us right now of whether we can find a technology that actually makes me, PIH, all these different groups actually feel like they can commit resources. And so I know that we can probably go down two pathways of one kind of, design phase. But if we're going to actually get things built and have dev time and PM time dedicated to this, we really need to solve that underlying question, unless there's other resources that are available that I don't know about that can be dedicated just to be building, this set of tools that that Greg is talking about. So I just want to caution us, or at least from my perspective, from AMPA's perspective, like we need to solve that question before we can commit anything.
Let me suggest this, because we're going to run out of time trying to figure out when to go. I would say potentially let's make sure that we are going to reconvene, and let's say we'll reconvene next Monday, unless there's a reason not, at the design call time, unless something's scheduled there. That's number one. Number two, we have 3 or 4 threads now, technical, functional. Now there's resources, and we might want to have 2 or 3 people set up a talk thread where we start, or something else where we start figuring out what's on the agenda.
Sounds good with me.
Just to give us one more week worth of something to do, so we can use that to bootstrap the next part.
Right, and I don't know if this fits in with the resources piece, but we were going to have a community discussion around, what we mean by an investment roadmap, and I think that kind of ties into, well, what sort of information do we need to know about the different work people are doing that allow us and donors to strategically decide what, who's already got something covered and who needs funding for what, who needs resources, who doesn't. So yeah, just to put that out there, that's already kind of in the works for this week.
I will say, to answer JJ's question, this is just my perspective, but this is Mark. I guess it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing, but from us, I mean, we certainly have our preference of technology, but we're not too far down any road. So like, if we feel there's a really good solid team building something in X technology, we're probably likely to, jump on board with it if we can. So I'm not really as much concerned as like figuring out the technology first as in figuring out, do we have enough committed people? But again, if JJ needs to know that first, then kind of chicken and the egg a bit. But
yeah, cool. Thank you. We're at the top of the hour here. Many people, obviously, who should be in this conversation can't make it today. Maybe if you were in the conversation and had a chance to review the concept paper, if you could comment on it in that talk thread that Burkett started, The Amazing Future for OpenMRS. That way, those who weren't part of this conversation will be able to weigh in and see if this fits their needs, and then look forward to seeing everyone in a week's time. From my end, for next week, I'll liaison work with people to try to develop a short list of these components, which I think we might want to include. And then perhaps if Burke has time, he could lead some of the tech assessment too.
Great. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks for organizing this, Jen. This was really great.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Jen.
This is really exciting.
Thanks, everyone.